Hey guys, I'm Claes from Masterclaes and welcome to my studio. Today I would like to show you my setup. There are two options. Either I work with my MacBook Pro, which is a 2019 16-inch model, and it has an 8-core i9 processor, or I have my Mac Mini. The Mac Mini is a 2018 model with a 6-core i7 processor with 32 GB of RAM. The basis of my hybrid system is a UAD system. Here I have 3 UAD2 satellites. One is an octa-core and the two other ones are quad-cores. In rack number 3 down here, I've got 2 Apollo 16s which provide me with 32 inputs and 32 outputs into my Pro Tools system. So that's how I can manage to hook up all this analog gear. The heart of my monitoring system is an SSL 6. I have the option to have multiple inputs and outputs, so the outputs from my Apollo 16s end up in here, and I use the 6 as a monitor controller. Here I have a TC Electronic Clarity M, and the Clarity M is a standalone hardware loudness meter. So because I'm working on different channels like YouTube or Spotify, they have different levels, so that's why I'm using the Clarity M. So that sums up the computer system. Now let's have a look at the hardware. So rack 1 is my master bus processing rack, mainly. I've got some nice tube compressors here at the bottom, but I will discuss them later. The centerpiece of the rack is the SSL Fusion. It's just an amazing color box. It's a culmination of all the nice analog and digital processors I like, but then totally analog and all in one box. It features an input trim, which is very handy when you're working with a really hot mix. You can trim it down a bit to accommodate the settings. There's a high pass filter, 30, 40 and 50 Hertz. Very handy to clean up the low end. That's very handy. And there's a vintage drive. The vintage drive really reminds me about like the Crane Song Head. Crane Song Head is an AD-DA converter I had for years, and I especially liked the tape emulation, the second and the third order harmonic distortion that it added. And that's something that I find in the Fusion as well, but then in the analog domain. I've got a gentle setting on the drive, which imparts second order harmonics, and the density, that's what induces the third order harmonics. So I've got that mainly engaged, and it will be slightly green when I'm using it on the mix. So it's not a strong setting, it's a softer setting. Next is the violet EQ. It's a vintage sounding EQ comparable to my Pultecs I've got here in my back. They have a low and a high shelf featuring 30 Hz, 50 Hz, 70 Hz or 90 Hz and 8, 12, 16 or 20 kilohertz. It opens up the sound really nice, and also the punch and the depth is comparable to the Pultecs. It's a different sound because it's non-tube. It's just solid state. Next is the high frequency compressor. It reminds me a bit of the Empirical Labs Fatso, which gives you a tape simulation. Well, this actually does a bit the same. Once you have set the threshold, all you need to do is set the crossover, so the high part of the crossover gets compressed. Also, I'm using this very gently to have this tape compression kind of sound. Stereo image is something I've been looking for a long time, to have it in an analog way. This is basically an MS process where you have the space controlling the mids and the width controlling the sides. But it's just that gentle widening of the sound, what's going on, and it's just amazing. There's an option to engage a transformer in the signal path. It might induce a little bit more beefiness, but regarding what kind of style of music I'm mixing, I will engage it or not, and also depending on what compressor I will be using on the insert. The insert button is like golden. My setup goes in the Fusion, and then I have the insert send go into the API 2500, into the Smart C2. The output from there goes to the 33609. From there it goes into the Avalon 747 SP, and then the output is going back into the insert return. So it's very easy to engage or disengage one or multiple compressors. So if I engage this, my first option is my API 2500. Typical API sound, big, beefy, but still transparent and in the face. A long time ago, I needed a compressor for my live work to glue my mix together. So I called Ronald Brent at Galaxy Studios. He was working there back then. I asked him for some advice, and he said, Peter, just go and get yourself an API 2500. It's just one of the best stereo bus compressors around. So I did, and I put it on top of the XL4, and I engaged the bypass button. We started doing the sound check in the morning, and yeah, once that the band was playing, I saw 3 or 4 dB of gain reduction. I said, oh, let's try it now. And I engaged the button, and the PA jumped forward like 6 meters. It was at Workter with a 24-box Y18 system each side, so it was pretty amazing to feel the impact of the compressor, and it all comes down to the thrust function. That is just an amazing function. Also, the new or old style button, it's very, very, very musical, but I always use it in the old style. It also is a transformer input and output compressor, so that means a lot of color gets imparted. So I might not use the transformer in the Fusion because then too many colors get mixed up. A transistor based input and output section is here with the Smart C2. It's a typical VCA style SSL bus compressor made by the guy who was working for SSL at the time, Mr. Alan Smart. He took out the SSL compressor, just added some nice features like dual mono operation, a crush button that is basically the same as hitting the 4 buttons on the 1176. So this is like over compression, adding distortion, and just really making it dirty. I won't use it on my stereo bus, but if you want to use the compressor on your drum bus or any other sidechain bus, that might work. Also, when you buy the unit, you get supplied with a Y splitter. The Y splitter is fed one side into the input, and on the other side it goes into the sidechain input of the compressor, and it has a built-in 150 Hz high-pass filter. So you can engage that high-pass filter by pressing a button. That's very neat because a lot of compressors will, well, basically all compressors will work harder if you turn up the kick, and if you want to avoid that and avoid the pumping, it's very easy to here engage the high pass filter. From there, the signal goes into my vintage Neve 33609C compressor. It's a diode bridge compressor featuring a built-in limiter and a built-in compressor. The limiter is set to slow because the transients are let through in a better way than putting it into fast mode, and actually the slow mode is slower than the attack time of the compressor. So in some kind of way, if it hits the compressor, which is set on a low ratio, and I still get some peaks, those peaks will start sounding very punchy. So that's the work of my limiter here. I've set the threshold high enough so it does only when the music is loud, does only 1 or 2 dB of compression. And I can engage it or disengage it if it doesn't suit the song. The compressor itself is either set in release mode A1 or A2. A1 and A2 are automatic release times, and they are based upon the release times of optical compressors. So this gets emulated in the 33609, which makes it extremely musical. A little bit of makeup gain is applied, and then I have the option to engage or disengage the compressor. Output goes into the Avalon 747 SP. I don't know if you noticed, but there is no tube up till now. So here you have the TSP, which is the tube signal path, and you can engage it. It's a tube, it's a different circuitry that gets engaged in the signal path, and it just adds color, brightness, warmth, in the face sound. The compressor itself is an optical compressor, so it's very, very slow. I've got it even set on a ratio of 2/1 with a little bit of makeup gain. And the cool feature on the 747 is that you have a variable sidechain. It has 2 filters, one for the low, low, medium, and one for the high, medium, and high frequency. So you can have a listen to this by engaging the sidechain. Listen, and you have the sidechain you can engage or not. The compressor section can be engaged separately of the tube signal path. Last but not least, it features an amazing EQ. It's just the typical Avalon, bright, pristine, slightly metallic sounding high end, but that's what I like about it. So I'm adding just a touch of sub and a touch of top end, and it just opens up my whole mix. The EQ can be bypassed or engaged as well. So then this goes back in here, and if I want, I can have the insert pre-EQ. So if I would have boosted some low end here on the violet EQ, it would affect the compressors. So if I don't do this, I don't need the pre-EQ. If I do this, then I will need the pre-EQ. Of course, there's also a bypass function on the Fusion, so you can have a listen to what the difference is with or without. Believe me, it doesn't get disengaged a lot. It's just an amazing box. The output of the Fusion goes into my GML 8200. It's a box that doesn't need much introduction. It's a 5-band parametric world-class, world-standard EQ. I've got it set up so the low end and the high end are in shelving modes. So if the mix needs a little bit more brightness or is not enough in the face, I can just dial in all of that, while even adding some air, because the frequencies up here go until 26 kilohertz. So if you're working at 96, you still have the bright and open sound that air can provide. And then there's still 2 other bands that I can use freely to clean up a little bit of the low end if that would be needed. As I told you, there are 3 tube compressors also in the rack. The first compressor is a Thermionic Culture Phoenix. It's a very new compressor, very transparent, very open sounding, very gentle compressor, which can be driven hard, but I like it on piano. Send 5 and 6 is my Summit Audio DCL 200. It's a hybrid compressor, which means it has a tube signal path, but the compression itself is done by a VCA. The VCA emulates a very new compressor. So it's very gentle, very soft, but still imparts a lot of low mid punch when you engage it on a channel. I think it's my 3rd compressor I ever bought, and it has stayed with me for over 20 years, and I don't think I will ever sell it or trade it. Send 5 and 6 is my 4th compressor I ever bought, and it is a TLA C1. It's not a really expensive compressor compared to all the rest that's in the rack, but it has a lot of flair. It's also a tube signal path with the VCA compressor, and I put in some new old stock General Electric tubes, and that just adds a little bit of mid punch. It's one of my favorite compressors on guitars. Also, it's not really set for hard operation. I have a really slow attack, quick release, low ratio, and it does 3 dB of compression. So by now you must be wondering, what about calibration? What about levels? What about settings? Well, let me explain. Here I've got a signal generator inserted in a Pro Tools track. I've got the inside level monitoring plugin also on the insert. I have a free slot here, so what I'll do is I'll have my I/O, and let's say I'm gonna monitor the Phoenix. I have it set up with a threshold and a ratio which I like until it reads 3 dB of compression. And then I adjust the output gain until here it reads -21 again. And that's how I calibrate all this analog gear. If you like this video, please smash the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I will be posting new videos about Rack 2, 3 and 4 very soon. Hope to see you again. Bye bye.